great pleasure and honor to present to you one of the major sociologists, in my judgment, of the 20th century. I think already the fact that his work is enduring, has enduring value, was already proven by the discussions we've already had. I wanted to actually read some fragments from the first chapter of his memoir, in which he intellectual memoir, where he reflects upon the first course he took in sociology, which was Balzac as a Sociologist by Albert Solomon. It's really marvelous. I mean, the major theme is that he thought he was studying American sociology when he came to the school, and he in the fragment I was going to read, he concludes that he learned a lot about French 19th century French society. He learned nothing more about American society, but he learned a perspective of sociological imagination or sociological insight. I also wanted to say, and I think I'm going to conclude with this, that in 1963, Peter Berger published his elegant and seductive invitation to sociology, still the most influential, original, disciplinary propaganda in our field. Many people of my generation, I'm looking at Eviatar, and I'm suspecting that we share this, read the book, that it changed our life, and therefore we are here today. And so much more to say about Peter Berger, but actually he has more to say about Peter Berger than anyone else. So I present to you Peter Berger.
Jeff, thank you very much for this kind of very nice introduction. I always feel I should say something humble, like, shucks, no, not me, or something. But then I think of what Golda Meir is supposed to have once said to one of her ministers: don't be so humble, you're not that important. I've been taught long ago that one should never start an address with an apology, but this time I really must. I mean, you came here expecting to see me. Instead, you see a ghostly image that I can't even imagine. I've never used Skype before in my life. This is my virgin experience with this technology. You either have already seen or are getting Thomas Luckmann on the video. Has it been shown yet?
No. In order to reach you at 6, we decided that he will follow you.
Okay, well, all right. So you get me on Skype and Luckmann on video. It's almost a kind of seance. Okay, I'm pretty sure we're both still alive. It also occurred to me that actually 50 years since the publication of the book would be in 2 years. So probably the organizers of the conference will make sure that we're still alive at this event. As you know, in sociology, in any science, there are no certainties, there are only probabilities. But I think the data, I talked to Luckmann a couple of weeks ago, so he at least was alive then, and one can never be sure, but it seems to me the data indicates that I'm alive tonight. In any case, the new school is an appropriate place to talk about this book, which once somebody described as a minor classic, which is both an insult and a compliment in one phrase. Very interesting. Thomas Luckmann and I met here as graduate students, and we worked in the book while we were both on the graduate faculty. That was about the time of Lincoln's second inaugural, as some of you may know. It was a very felicitous collaboration, and both of us would not withdraw anything we said in that book. Other things I wrote all that time ago I'm now embarrassed about, but not this. I think if Tom and I had wrote it today, it'd probably be somewhat simpler language, but the message would not change. But what's also very appropriate in terms of celebrating this book, or at least talking about this book at the new school, is that what we did in this book was to create a theoretical marriage between three classical authors, Emil Durkheim, Max Weber, and Mead, George Herbert Mead, and mainly mediated Mead through Alfred Schütz. So the grandparents of this book were all teachers of ours at the new school. Now, I wasn't sure what I should say to this group. I thought I would somehow again elaborate on the theoretical framework, which I found extremely useful in a wide variety of empirical investigations. But I thought it might be more useful to simply to illustrate the range of applications of this theoretical frame of reference. And I will talk briefly about 4 cases in my own career where I found this extremely useful, not simply as a theoretical construct, but as a method to understand social realities. The first one was in the 1970s. I spent a lot of time in Mexico at the time, and I worked with an individual most of you probably never heard of, Ivan Illich, who was a very eccentric genius. He was a Roman Catholic priest, more or less kicked out of the church. I don't know whether he was still theoretically a priest, but he didn't act as a priest. He ran a very idiosyncratic syntax in Cuernavaca, in Mexico, and was then a beautiful place. I understand it's a little less beautiful now, lots of industry and pollution. And English was very important. We disagreed on almost everything from the beginning, but we liked each other, and I still admire him. I still admire him today. He's no longer living. And he introduced me to the whole problematic of modernization and development, which, of course, in a place like Mexico, was very, very alive as a problem, practical, political problem, as well as a theoretical problem. And what I was trying to understand, what I think I began to understand in Mexico, I worked with Illich for about 3 years. I didn't stay there for 3 years. I went back and forth from the States, trying to understand the structures of modernity. What is modernity? And specifically, that's where the sociology of knowledge comes in. What is modern consciousness? At the time, we began work, we were 3 of us, my wife Brigitte, who's also a sociologist, my brother-in-law, Hans-Fred Kellner from Germany, and we started work on a book which came out a few years later, called The Homeless Mind, Modernization and Consciousness. And we tried to work out systematically the essential structures of modern consciousness. It was an interesting context. At that time in Mexico, just about every social scientist we met was some kind of Marxist. And except for Illich, who didn't fit into any ideological category, very much a man of his own, most of the people we talked to were Marxists, and none of us were. And tried to deal with these issues from a non-Marxist point of view in terms of the sociology of knowledge as basically walking in the footsteps of Alfred Schütz. We then tried to formulate. It was completely a sociology of knowledge as we understand it approach. Structures of consciousness and its relationship to social structures is, after all, the basic premise of any sociology of knowledge. And various concepts that we developed at the time, I still find extremely useful today. Just to mention one, which actually Illich once mentioned in a conversation, but he was not a systematic thinker. He didn't elaborate it. A very funny term he used, extrinsic and intrinsic packages. And what he meant by that, and we took that over and elaborated it, a package, he meant a combination of behavior and consciousness. And we asked what of those are intrinsic to modernity and which are not. And give you a simple example where I first really got this. It was at the time I was traveling a lot in developing countries because that interested me. And I was in an airplane in Africa. And it was the airport in Entebbe. I flew to Nairobi, Entebbe in Uganda. And it was early in the morning, like 4:30 in the morning. I was drowsy and jet lagged. And I went up into the plane, which was decorated like an African village. It was an African airline. And they were playing African music over the loudspeaker. And the flight attendants were dressed in African sort of tribal costumes. I said, where am I? And then I had the thought, who is flying this plane? And I assure you, I was not then or ever a racist. I wasn't thinking of the skin color of the pilot. I was thinking of where was he trained? I'd hope not in Uganda. And I wanted this pilot to be trained exactly as a United Airlines or British Airways pilot. That means a particular structure of consciousness, which is intrinsic to modernity, to a modern institution like an aeroplane. If in many ways, people have argued, African culture is more humane than Western culture, well, maybe so. But if he flies that plane by African values, it will crash. He must act and think in a very narrow structure of consciousness, which he has in common with anybody who operates in an institution of a modern institution today. So another, which I find extremely useful right now, is the concept of multi-relationality. A modern person, in order to operate in society, has to be able to juggle quite a number of different relations. At work, in his private life, political life, whatever. But a premise of the sociology of knowledge is that everything that happens in society must have a correlate in consciousness. So if multi-relationality means that, say, contemporary American or European has to be able to juggle all of this in his behavior, his or her behavior. But at the same time, this person must be able, within consciousness, to juggle very different, what Schütz called relevant structures. What is relevant in one situation is not relevant in another. And that's an extremely important thing to realize. And in fact, I'll close with my fourth example, which is my recent book, which precisely is, well, they brought it. Good,
Here it is. In my formal remarks, I actually had something to say about the book, but go ahead.
Well, I don't trust the institution, I'm not my own publisher, but they said they would send some material to here, which apparently they did, Jeff.
Yes.
Okay, enough of my adventures in Mexico. When I came to Boston University in 1979, after a little while I started, after a couple of years, I started a research center for which I got outside funding to pursue what interested me. Modernity, consciousness, modern behavior, modern ideas, and also its political implications. So I started an institute which still exists. I'm no longer director, I'm a senior research fellow, which means I don't have any of the bureaucratic stuff to worry about. I can have an office and run projects. It's called the Institute on Culture, Religion and World Affairs. And we've dealt with various issues very internationally. We've been well funded by almost all American foundations. We had one single grant from the United States Agency for International Development. Everything else was private foundations. And because I found this extremely interesting, we did much of our work on Pentecostalism, which is an absolutely fascinating topic. And even if you're a card-carrying atheist, But if you're a sociologist, you must be interested in this. It is an extremely explosively growing phenomenon all over the so-called global south, Africa, Latin America, Asia. And probably is the fastest growing religious movement in human history. It began in 1906, I think it was, the first of the 20th century, with a revival in Los Angeles, when a black preacher came out of Kansas to Los Angeles and started preaching in an abandoned stable. And the congregation immediately was very charismatic. His name was Seymour. He was an interracial congregation, very unusual in California, the first years of the 20th century. And then they sent out missionaries all over the world. There were similar Pentecostal explosions elsewhere. And Pentecostalism, in case you don't know, is a form of evangelical Protestantism, but with very definite peculiarity. Peculiarities in the plural. One crucial element is healing. They believe in divine healing, miracles, whether this is any medical, empirical validity or not doesn't have to concern me as a sociologist. If they believe it, it has real implications. And the other is speaking in tongues, so-called glossolalia, which they understand as being possessed by the Holy Spirit. And to an outside observer, it just seems like gibberish. It's an extremely important movement and growing with incredible rapidity. Well, it began with Pastor Seymour's little congregation in Los Angeles. And now the Pew Research Center a few years ago estimated the number of Pentecostals in the world, and they arrived at 600 million, which I'm convinced is an understatement. Mainly it leaves out China, where Pentecostalism is exploding. Much of it is either illegal or at least unregistered, so-called house churches, people meeting for services in garages or homes or empty lots. I think it's much more than 600 million, and it continues to grow. Now, the interesting question is why? And I think I can now answer this phenomenal growth. And there are a number of reasons. One of it is a strange replication of Max Weber's Protestant ethic. Pentecostalism encourages the kind of virtues that the early Protestants had. Sobriety, hard work, very important. Saving. Don't spend the little pay you get every Saturday or Friday or whatever to drink and have fiestas, but put it somewhere in a piggy bank and save for the education of your children. Do this for a generation, and what you get is social mobility, unless the macroeconomic situation is so desperate that nobody can get anywhere, whether he practices Protestant ethic, or Buddhist ethic, or whatever, because there's no way to move. But even where there is incipient economic growth, and there are some studies on this which are very interesting, you have Pentecostals at an advantage. The other things, in terms of it's a revolution of consciousness, and it's a very interesting synthesis of community and individualism. And we financed, our research center financed the work of a British sociologist who now is sort of the dean of Pentecostal studies. His name is David Martin. He was many years at London School of Economics. He's now retired. And he's a very careful man. He didn't want to be too generalizing, but basically what I get from his work is he discovered that Pentecostalism is a modernizing force, which is counterintuitive, because social scientists, journalists, people in the media think of Pentecostalism sort of supernaturalism, which they don't like or believe in, miracles, possession by the Holy Spirit, very interesting demons, exorcisms. How can they be modernizing? Well, they can. And one very important reason which Pentecostalism shares with other forms of evangelical Protestantism Evangelical Protestantism is the only major religious tradition in which an act of individual decision is at the core of the religion. You cannot be born a Christian, you have to be born again as a Christian. Individual choice, individual decision. What could be more modern than that? And it has implications. I just want to put thoughts in your mind which will keep you awake tonight, I hope. It has implications for the United States. It is not an accident. I would propose, or I hypothesize, that in the United States the Bible Belt overlaps with the Sun Belt, which is one of the most economically dynamic regions of the country. Now there you have, I teach periodically at the Baptist University in Texas, which going from Boston to Central Texas, Jeff?
Sorry.
Going from Boston to Central Texas, they're going to a different country. And there, evangelical Protestantism has hegemony. Why? Because I think Weber's Protestant ethic is still at work compared to places like the Northeast and even more the West Coast, where people are much more relaxed about things like sobriety and saving and hard work. Okay, enough about Pentecostalism. I could talk about this all night. I should say individualism is interesting. It's balanced with very strong community. The Pentecostal church is a closely knit network of people, local church, usually small, usually very much of the same ethnic background, and the individualism of the religion works together very creatively with the community which these individuals belong to. I promised to have threatened you with 2 more cases, so I will give you 2 more cases. In the late 1980s, I was asked to chair an international study group on the future of South Africa. It was financed by, mostly, it was originally financed by Hoffman, who was then he died in the meantime. He was a mining tycoon in South Africa. He was an opponent of apartheid from the beginning on moral grounds. He thought it was an inhuman system, and he personally financed most of the non-violent part of the resistance to apartheid. He didn't support guerrilla warfare, but there were lots of passive resistance, whatever peaceful ways of opposing apartheid, which were very effective. The project was called South Africa Beyond Apartheid, and I thought I would just give you one little picture of it. Our mandate was to, not that we should think about the future of South Africa. In fact, when I arrived there, I realized there were about 20 books about it, what it was likely to be, what people would want to be, none of which, as you can imagine, happened. But our mandate was to make a survey of views about the future of the country from everybody, from the government and from Afrikaners right of the government to the townships where the so-called comrades were attacking the police and fighting the system. What do these people think will happen, and what do they think should happen? Now, what they thought should happen hasn't changed all that much. What they thought would happen, including what we thought would happen, was not what happened at all. In fact, our book was published in 1988. It was a bestseller in South Africa for exactly 1 year, because after that it was obsolete. And one of the most false predictions I ever made as a sociologist at the conclusion of the project, the co-director was a South African, and I wrote an article in an American publication, the last sentence of which, to my embarrassment, I think I can quote verbatim. This was 1988, and I said, those who want positive change in South Africa should think not in terms of years or even decades, but multiple decades. I think that was the sentence. Well, 1988 was when the government of South Africa began negotiating with Mandela's African National Congress. And in 1990, Mandela was released from prison, and in 1994, he became president of South Africa. We were grotesquely wrong. I'm very cautious about making predictions. But our analysis of the situation as it was then was, I think, very good. And I just want to, we had a team of 22 individuals, not all social scientists. We had a businessman, we had a journalist, all kinds of people. And we agreed on one single value, that we thought apartheid was unacceptable and the system should go. We also said it should not destroy the economy, and we would hope there would be little violence, all of which in fact is exactly what happened. Remarkable little violence. The system sort of collapsed from within, very much by the way like the Soviet Union. I just want to tell you one little incident which directly concerns social construction of reality. My job, I was chairing this heterogeneous group. We had, most of them were South Africans. We had one American besides myself. We had a European. We had 4 black South Africans, and I think 2 or 3 mixed race ones who called colored at the time. It's a very heterogeneous group. And my job, from very different backgrounds, and my job was to get them on a common agenda, otherwise it wouldn't work. So we met in a hunting lodge in the Eastern Transvaal, called Mbulwa, kind of place where I can't sleep because it's so quiet. I'm an urban type. I come from Vienna. I spent much of my life in New York City, and Boston's not exactly quiet either. I liked the sound of traffic in the background. It was absolutely still. And I was trying to tell them how to do the study. And the way I defined as far as I know, the term first occurred to me at that gathering. I said, our job is to produce a normative and cognitive map of South Africa. What are the norms which animate the major actors, political actors, and what they hope will happen, what they would like to happen, and how they see the situation. Okay? The term cognitive map, I think, is a good one. Normative map isn't so bad either. But both are obviously sociology of knowledge concepts. Well, one thing that happened there was very interesting, and I think I'll tell you the episode. One of the people in the group was at that time a young Afrikaner journalist by the name of Helen, what was her name? Helen, I forget now. She was a Marxist at the time, very much engaged in anti-apartheid activities. She's now, she became, after the change in the country, she became mayor of Cape Town. As a journalist, she became quite famous in early age because she discovered that Steve Biko, one of the leaders of the anti-apartheid movement, was killed while in police custody. So she was a kind of hero of the anti-apartheid movement. And one of the points I made, well, she's now leader of opposition in parliament. It's called the Democratic Alliance, which is the major opposition party to the African National Congress, which is the ruling party. Her name is Helen Zille, Z-I-L-L-E. She was Afrikaner, I guess originally of German origin, judging by the name. One thing I tried to impress on everyone was what Max Weber called value freeness. So when you interview people, don't tell them what you think. We are not interested in what you think. We know what you think. We want to find out what they think. Keep yourself out of it. Try to report what they say and don't criticize it. It's not interesting for us. We want to know what they think. So she raised her hand and said, this is impossible. There is no such thing as objectivity. we're engaged in the struggle, and everything we think and write must be governed by the struggle. So I talked with her for about 30 minutes, 20 minutes, I guess. And then I gave up. I said, okay, do what you can do, we'll see. Well, her assignment was the Afrikaner right wing, the people who were right of the government. There were some of them violent, anti-black violence. They had a beautiful name in South Africa. They were called bitter enders. They were defending apartheid to the bitter end. It's a term can be applied to lots of things, including groups of sociologists in certain cases. She wrote one of the best reports in the whole study. And until you got to the last few pages, you would think she was one of them. She was absolutely opposed to everything they stood for. And the last 3 pages or so were about the struggle and what we have to do. We just edited that out. It was uninteresting. The proof of the pudding was what happened after the book was published. We got some, our method, by the way, was after we wrote every chapter, we wrote, the chapters were written by the members of the team. We sent it to the organization or the group which was interviewed, not to let them censor what we said, but did we misrepresent you? The whole purpose of the project was to represent what these people thought. We got quite a few very sharp criticisms. Nobody criticized what we said about them. They said, you believe the lies of these bastards, and how could you be so stupid as to fall for this? It was proof of the pudding. We had done an incorrect job. Now, I don't have too much time left, so I will take the liberty of talking to you about my most recent work, which Jeff Goldfarb was kind enough to lift up to the sky. Which I think is a new paradigm on the relationship of religion and modernity. Now, new paradigm sounds megalomaniac, have too much of a sense of the ridiculous to think that I'm infallible. But I think it's a new way of looking at relationship, which is, I think, helps to understand it. And most new paradigms come out of the disintegration of another paradigm. Disintegration in the sense that it no longer is tenable. And I think the paradigm that has collapsed in recent decades is secularization theory, which has many adherents, had many, it doesn't have so many today, different angles, but has one basic assumption in common. Modernity means the decline of religion. More modernity, less religion. In my own intellectual biography, when I started out being interested in sociology of religion, I also assumed secularization theory. Everyone else around me did. And it wasn't crazy. There were some reasons for it. Some of it was not completely wrong. But that modernity would mean a decline of religion simply has not happened. At all. The modern world is full of enormous religious eruptions, explosions, with 2 exceptions. One is geographical. Europe is different, very different from the United States. Europe is the most secularized region in the world, by any criterion you want to use. And the other is an international intellectual class, which is very much the same all over the world, especially in the humanities and social sciences. Go to a sociology department in Mexico or in Indonesia or in Germany or in California, and you don't get too many religious people. You get a few. There's another kind of sort of more evangelical underground at Harvard, which is very interesting. Okay, those are the exceptions. They have to be explained. I don't have time to explain them. I think they can be explained. So the question is, if not secularization, what then is characteristic of modernity? And my answer is pluralization, pluralism, and which is pervasive and I think almost inevitable with modernization. You can show why. And well, I'm now now use the term two pluralisms to tell you what I mean by that. First, religious pluralism in the usual sense of the word. In the same, you can't hear me? You can hear me? Okay. Different religions coexisting more or less peacefully in the same society. That's the first dualism. It's religious pluralism in the narrow sense of the word. And that is pervasive and increasing because of very basic modern facts, mass communications, mass education, travel, etc. The other pluralism is, and that is where secularization theory wasn't completely wrong, it's a pluralism between religious discourses and the secular discourse, which necessarily prevails in certain areas of society. Back to modernization of consciousness, the African airline pilot. He has a highly modern consciousness in one area of his life, but when he goes home, he may live in a completely different way. And there is a secular discourse which is very powerful, and we can analyze it, but it does not wipe out all the religious discourses. This has enormous consequences, both for individuals, for religious institutions, and for the state. For the individuals, it means that, something I mentioned before in terms of evangelical Protestantism, religion is no longer a fate, but a choice. You can, even if you decide or are pushed to adhere to the religion of your family or tradition, you have to decide to stay with it. Take a simple example, you can have wonderful religious pluralism in New York City. You can go to areas of Brooklyn where you think you're in a shtetl in Eastern Europe at the turn of the 20th century. Very close Orthodox Jewish communities, where if a person is raised in that community, it's difficult to leave. But this person cannot, for psychological and social reasons, but the person cannot live in America without realizing that he's not forced to live in that milieu. All he has to do is take off take a male example because it's more dramatic, rabbinical students. All he has to do is take off his, 17th century hat, put on a baseball cap and take the subway to Manhattan. It can be done. In fact, there's some nice novels about this. Individual choice. Religion is no longer a destiny, but a choice. That's very, very significant. That further, this means that the churches, synagogues, religious communities become voluntary associations, even if their theology doesn't like that at all. And the Roman Catholic Church is a principal example of this. Between Vatican I in the 1860s, which proclaimed the infallibility of the Pope, which was aggressively self-assured, to Vatican II, which for the first time produced theological reasons for religious freedom. Tremendous change. Finally, it has political implications, because the turbulence of pluralism has to be politically managed. And there are different models of this, and the separation of church and state. The United States is not the only example. Different models of it, you could say the French model. It works fairly well. Certainly in America it has worked remarkably well. And that creates actually issues of policy. The United States government is by law has to advocate religious freedom all over the world. Very iffy proposition. Is the American model of separation of church and state applicable all over the world? Probably not. And it's an interesting political question. What does this mean for American foreign policy? We're going to have a conference of that in Washington next fall. Let me come back to the New School and to Alfred Schütz and give you an example that might wake you up if you were in danger of falling asleep. One of Schütz's very useful concepts is the concept of relevant structure. Different areas of life have different relevancies. And multi-relationality means that the modern individual has to juggle them. He or she is in one relevant structure in the morning and different relevant structure in the evening. Religion is no exception to this. So let's take a very simple example. Suppose you're a man who's in a political meeting where various strategies are discussed of your political group, political party. And sitting next to you didn't know her before is a woman who's passionately on your side of this debate. And this is debate back and forth, and she and you are really in tandem. And then you have a cup of coffee afterwards, and you discuss this issue and what the chances are of your point of view prevailing. And then you suddenly discover, and probably she may at the same time, that you're attracted to each other. What happens there? You shift from a political relevance to an erotic relevance. It could be the other way around. You find somebody, another individual, extremely attractive, and then he or she comes up with some terrible opinions on politics, and you think are terrible, and suddenly the attractiveness disappears. You couldn't possibly have any relationship of personal nature with this person. Well, I think my allotted time is about up. One of the aspects of modernity is punctuality. You go by the clock, watch, and everything. So thank you for listening to me. Good evening.
Okay, bye-bye.
Goodbye.